Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, comrades. Welcome to this webinar hosted by the Joint Trade Union Movement of Trinidad and Tobago, JTUM, where this morning we will be discussing the matter of vaccine mandates and its implications for workers in the workplace. My name is Antonia Tika de Freitas. I am the president of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association, tutor in Trinidad and Tobago. And I know this morning we have comrades from both within Trinidad and Tobago and around the region, further afield. Welcome to you all. We have a very distinguished panel this morning with us, and just some house rules, comrades. When you have your comments or your observations, we ask that you place them in the Q&A box directed to the panelists, and we will extract them from there at the appropriate time and share with our panelists. As with everything, we thank God for life, and so I invite us all to engage in a moment of silent reflection, asking for his guidance in today's proceedings, as well as thanking him for all the blessings which we have received from him. Thank you very much, comrades. To open our program this morning and start off our discussions with the welcome remarks, we have the Assistant Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Comrade Trevor Johnson, who is the General Secretary of our Banking and Insurance General Workers Union in Trinidad and Tobago. I invite Comrade Johnson to do our welcome now, please.
Good morning, colleagues. Hope you can all hear me well. And thank you, Comrade and Sister Antonia Tika de Freitas, our chair and moderator for today's proceedings. Thank you as well. And let me welcome our very distinguished panelists who will be speaking to us this morning. Sister Vera Guseva from the ILO Caribbean Office, my good friend and colleague, Sister Sandra Massiah, out of Public Services International, Caribbean Office as well. My very good friend and colleague out of UNI Global Union, the Americas region, Marcio Monzane, who is the Regional Secretary of UNI Americas, and of course, Dr. Garth Anderson, President of the Caribbean Union of Teachers. So welcome to you all. Welcome also on the panel, General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Comrade Ozzy Warwick, as we engage this very important webinar today. The title and the subject matter of this webinar is Vaccine Mandates and its Implications on Workers and the Workforce. And I'm here to welcome you just very briefly, and I bring you greetings from the President of the Joint Trade Union Movement, Comrade Ansel Roger, who is unavoidably not able to be with us just at this time. Hopefully he will join us later in the proceedings. This is a very significant moment and webinar for not just the Joint Trade Union Movement, but the entire trade union movement of Trinidad and Tobago, and I would dare say the region. As you know, the entire world has been grappling with the global pandemic of COVID-19, and which has put us in an unprecedented state of lockdowns and all sorts of various positions and representations from governments around the region, governments around the world. And I think it's very important that we are able to meet today and to have some perspectives shared from our various panelists. We are into the third year of this pandemic, and so there would have been time to review, reflect, and to be able to see how we go forward from here on. Even as we speak, different countries are making adjustments in terms of the pandemic. We see in some cases, what we might perceive to be draconian measures, and in others, we see other countries going another route. So we would all be very interested this morning to hear from the respective panelists, hear their views. We know there are people who may be pro-vaccine, there may be people who may be anti, there may be people who may have a neutral position, but we're all here to respect each other's views, to listen to what the panelists would have to share with us, and hopefully in the question and answer time, we would be able to get some responses, share our views, and the expectation is that we would all be able to leave here this morning or today more enlightened than when we came in, and hopefully in a reflective mood in terms of as we go forward, whether we are a trade union leader, whether we're from one of the trade union internationals, from the health sector, from one of the individual unions, hopefully, and of course the leadership of the joint trade union movement itself, we can go away from this very enlightened and be able to address situations as they confront us as we continue to deal with this global pandemic. So thank you very much, all our participants who are on. We really appreciate that you have taken the time to be with us today. And I would now like to hand back over to our chair for today's proceedings, Sister Antonia Teca de Freitas, who will moderate and take us through the day's proceedings. Thank you very much, Sister Chair.
Thank you very much, Comrade Johnson, for those warm words. And we really and truly hope that panelists, that attendees as well, can walk away with some information, with some insight, with some understanding that they are not alone in this whole matter of return to the workplace and the threats that hang over our heads in some instances. Permit me now, colleagues, to introduce our first speaker. She is Ms. Vera Guseva, who is out of the ILO's Caribbean office. She has been involved since 2018 in the ILO Decent Work team within the Caribbean, and prior to that, she was at the Bureau for Workers' Activities of the ILO in Geneva. She was previously Deputy Director of International Relations Department in the Federation of Independent Trade Unions of Russia. Vera is well qualified to speak to us and to present to us the ILO's positions, which she will do subsequently. But at this point in time, I simply invite her to put on her camera and say hello to us all this morning. Vera?
Hello, thank you, Sister Antonia, for the presentation. Good morning, everyone. My pleasure to be here with you today.
Thank you very much. Our second speaker, our second panelist this morning will be Mr. Marcio Monzan. He holds a Doctor of Law degree from University in Brazil, and he has been involved in the union movement for 24 years since his election as a union leader in the Bank Workers Union in Brazil. And at that time, at age 23, he was the youngest unionist to be elected to the leadership of the biggest banking sector union of the country. Quite an illustrious accomplishment. He has served as the regional director of UNI Americas, UNI being that universal global union that represents some 200 million workers, from around 150 countries in service and finance industries. Marcio has been responsible for the commerce and finance sectors, addressing the demands of the affiliates in our Latin American and Caribbean region. Since 2011, he has been responsible for the UNI Global Union finance and continues to work with affiliates at that level, advocating positions and perspectives on their behalf at the level of ILO and the European Union. Marcio, my apologies. I invite you to say good morning to our attendees this morning.
Thank you very much. I would like first to say a special thank you to my colleague and friend, Trevor Johnson, who also is Vice President of UNI Americas, and to the Joint Trade Union Movement for inviting me, and good morning to all of you and the people who are listening and seeing us today.
Thank you very much. And our third presenter for this morning will be Ms. Sandra Massiah, who is a sub-regional secretary for the Caribbean of the Public Services International Organization. She is working with the 22 affiliates in 20 countries of the PSI, and she works with people in the English, French, and the Dutch-speaking Caribbean. PSI is a global union federation representing 30 million public sector workers, and they too, at that level, would advocate for our members at the level of the UN, the ILO, and the World Health Organization. Sandra is out of Barbados, and she's a well-known Caribbean trade unionist, having started her trade union career when she worked in the public service in Barbados. And prior to that, she worked as project coordinator for the Commonwealth Trade Union Council. Again, a wealth of experience. Sandra, good morning to you.
Good morning, Antonia, and my other colleagues who are panelists, as well as those who are participating with us. Lovely to be here. Looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you for taking time to be with us. We appreciate you being here. And last but not least, we have Dr. Garth Anderson, an educator who is the president of the Caribbean Union of Teachers, former president of the Jamaica Teachers Association, the principal of the Church Teachers College in Mandeville, Jamaica, and a member of the University Teaching Council in Jamaica. Dr. Anderson, good morning. Welcome.
Good morning, Madam Moderator, and good morning, colleagues. Looking forward to the engagement. This is a very important topic that I'm sure we are all aware affecting public sector workers, but in particular what is happening with our teachers as we seek to reopen our schools.
Yes, thank you very much so. And we will get into the meat of the matter right away, where I will invite Vera to share perspectives from the ILO with their thoughts, the positions of the organization on that issue of return to the workplace under COVID-19 situations, learning to live with it, the policies that are required, and more importantly, the need for social dialogue. So Vera, over to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning again, everyone. And it's my pleasure to speak today at this webinar. And I would like to thank the Joint Trade Union Movement for inviting ILO to be part of this discussion. I would like to share from the beginning that there is no ILO official position on compulsory vaccination. So what am I doing here? And as Sister Antonia said, I was invited to share ILO reports, conventions, and recommendations that might be relevant. ILO is well known for its standards, but it is also a knowledge hub for the world of work. And from the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, research, analysis, and reports were produced to support knowledge sharing for recovery. So when discussing the topic of vaccine mandates, it is important to bear in mind the overall context. And in my contribution, I would rely on the knowledge base built up to date by the ILO and the organization's institutional framework and decent work pillars, in particular, social dialogue and standards and rights at work. Just 1 month ago, the ILO published one of its flagship reports, the World Employment and Social Outlook Trends for 2022. And I'm afraid I do not have good news to share. The ILO has downgraded its forecast for labor market recovery in 2022. Global unemployment is expected to remain above pre-COVID levels until at least 2023. The downgrade in the 2022 forecast reflects to some extent the impact that recent variations of COVID-19, such as Delta and Omicron, are having on the world of work, as well as significant uncertainty regarding the future course of the pandemic. According to another ILO report, the 8th edition of the ILO Monitor of October 2021, labor market recovery from the pandemic shock has stalled during 2021. The loss of global working hours in the third quarter of 2021 compared to pre-pandemic levels amounts to the equivalent of 137 million jobs. Interestingly, progress in vaccination has emerged as a critical factor for labor market recovery, exposing inequalities between developed and developing countries. Estimates indicate that for every 14 persons fully vaccinated in the second quarter of 2021, one full-time equivalent job was added to the global labor market. The employment loss in low-income countries, where the share of fully vaccinated people is only 1.6%, is 50% larger than in high-income countries, where the vaccination rates stand at 60%. So what do international labor standards say about crisis response? They contain specific guidance for safeguarding decent work in the context of crisis response, including guidance that can be of direct relevance to the COVID-19 outbreak. One of the most recent international labor standards, the Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience recommendation, adopted by an overwhelming majority of ILO constituents, emphasizes that crisis responses need to ensure respect for all human rights and the rule of law, including respect for fundamental principles and rights at work and for international labor standards. The recommendation outlines a strategic approach to crisis response, including the adoption of a phased multi-track approach, implementing coherent and comprehensive strategies for enabling recovery and building resilience. What about social dialogue? How can it enable the formulation and implementation of an effective policies in times of crisis and recovery? In line with the same recommendation 205, Employment and Decent Work for Peace and Resilience, social dialogue is of critical importance in all aspects of the development, implementation, monitoring, and review of policy responses to crisis situations such as COVID-19 crisis. Social dialogue can ensure that these are grounded in respect for rights at work, tailored to national circumstances, and benefiting from local ownership. A climate of trust built through social dialogue and tripartism is also essential for the effective implementation of measures taken in response to the pandemic and its consequences. Accordingly, it is important to engage in processes and mechanisms to ensure efficient tripartite consultations as envisaged under numerous international labor standards to identify and reach consensus on solutions. Social dialogue should be carried out at all levels, national, sectoral, and enterprise, and indeed are in line with the national practices. And it is a key policy tool for ensuring the adoption of policies and programs that effectively deal with the crisis while mitigating the impact on employment and income. At enterprise level, it can be particularly important to keep workers informed, consultant, and aware of the impact of the measures foreseen on their own terms and conditions of employment and of the efforts taken to mitigate such impact, as well as for determining the steps that can be taken for their protection and as well as for the containment of the virus. So a very interesting question that indeed was asked a lot of times to the ILO. Can workers be obliged to get vaccinated to access the workplace? International labor standards do not directly address the question of mandatory vaccinations as a condition for work. Thus, the legal basis for such a measure would largely depend on the national regulatory framework. However, a standards-based approach to the question should emphasize the principle of dialogue and consultations between employers and workers. For the area of occupational safety and health, which may also comprise protective measures such as vaccinations, Occupational Safety and Health Convention number 155, and Promotional Framework for Occupational Safety and Health Convention 187, specifically require cooperation between management and workers at the enterprise level. While employers have a general obligation to ensure that workplaces are safe, consultations with workers on all aspects of occupational safety and health are an essential element for decision-making, and their cooperation is key for the implementation of workplace-related prevention measures. Social dialogue and consultations would also appear to be the best means to establish if vaccinations might indeed be required for designated jobs based on objective criteria. Where standards do specifically touch on measures of immunization, they focus on the importance of protective measures in the workplace being accessible and available rather than being obligatory. For example, in the Nursing Personal Recommendation 157, provides that immunization should be provided for the nursing personnel regularly exposed to special risks. So it is a means of protecting the nursing personnel. And the Occupational Health Services Recommendation 171 states that occupational health services might, where possible and appropriate, carry out immunizations in respect of biological hazards in the working environment. If a decision on mandatory vaccination is made by an employer, it should be implemented in a non-discriminatory manner in line with the requirements of Discrimination, Employment and Occupation Convention 111, and with due regard for specific circumstances that may require exemptions and accommodations. Finally, any required occupational safety and health measures shall not involve any expenditure for the workers as required by Convention 155. We can see that there is a central role of international labor standards as the tried and trusted foundation of the decent work agenda. And it is to reaffirm the framework within which any response to the COVID-19 pandemic may be formulated in order to prevent regression and put recovery efforts on a stable footing, answering the call of the 2030 development agenda to leave no one behind. Standards and effective and authoritative supervision are a fundamental part of the solution to this crisis. In its most recent report that was just issued in February 2022, the Committee of Experts on the Application of Conventions and Recommendations that is part of the ILO supervisory machinery underlined that the crisis does not suspend obligations under ratified international labor standards. Any derogations should be exercised within clearly defined limits of legality, necessity, and proportionality and non-discrimination. Virtually gathered at the 109th International Labour Conference, ILO's constituents, governments, workers, and employers have adopted a global call to action for a human-centered recovery from the COVID-19 crisis that is inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. Member states committed to reinforcing respect for international labor standards and to promoting their ratification, implementation, and supervision with particular attention to areas where serious gaps have been revealed by the crisis. This roadmap for an economic and social recovery from the crisis that is fully inclusive, sustainable, and resilient calls for the promotion of legal and institutional frameworks based on international labor standards, including fundamental principles and rights at work, and a particular emphasis on occupational safety and health in the light of experience of the COVID-19 pandemic. Before I conclude, let's have a look at the ILO now in its function as an employer. So what about vaccination in the ILO? Because this is another question that we are sometimes asked. Vaccination against COVID-19 is not mandatory for ILO staff, but vaccination, especially for those most at risk, is strongly recommended by the local medical authorities, by the UN medical directors, and by the ILO medical advisor. So all staff are strongly encouraged to become vaccinated and are expected to comply with applicable public health requirements at their duty stations. and any locations to which they have to travel in the course of their duties. So there is also a level of confidentiality, and we're not required to provide information regarding our vaccination status to colleagues regarding of hierarchy or any other officials. And everyone is expected to respect the privacy and discretion in this regard. So this is what I wanted to share in this opening remarks, and I look forward to our discussions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. And I'm glad that you have identified those particular standards that some of us may not be familiar with, and we will definitely go now and pay attention to the issue of the non-discriminatory application of vaccination, as well as privacy of your vaccination standard status. I think is something we would want to come back to. I just want to take the opportunity to remind participants, we are not at this time going into the science of the vaccine, what is experimental, what we believe is better than vaccination. We are not looking at that. We are concerned, and Vera has highlighted it, with the standards that should obtain in the workplace. As we return to the workplace under COVID-19 situation, it's now endemic in many of our countries. How do we deal with it? Vaccination being one approach that the state has taken. So we would be interested to hear how we as unionists can seek to have those particular labor standards that were cited upheld in our countries as we go forward in terms of dealing with this situation. Thank you very much, Vera. We move now to Marcio, who will give us a perspective from UNI Americas. And I know he has a short video that he would want to share with us at the start of his 15-minute presentation. So, Marcio?
Thank you very much. That's correct. Yeah, we start with the video.
Yes.
Brought the world to a stop. But what if we weren't there? For far too long, we have been invisible, underappreciated, undervalued, and underpaid. No more. It's time to fight for essential rights for essential workers, wages with dignity, paid sick leave, safe jobs, union representation, and the dignity we deserve. These essential rights would lift millions out of poverty while honoring the workers who keep our world moving during times of crisis and in calm. We have applauded. We have called them heroes. Now it's time to act. Now it's time to win. Essential rights for essential workers.
So I'm going to shift from this to another presentation. I'm sorry about that. Let's close this down. Now I would like to share with you a PowerPoint presentation that just to,
yes.
How can I do that? Yeah, here we are. And I hope that I can be as fast as not. I will not read all the presentation, but the video was to, I would like to start with this video because the video explains a little bit why and how UNI approaches the situation. So we have a different approaches around the COVID-19 and the rights of the works. During the pandemic, that the works was considered, or works, the service sector works was considered essentials. And they are still considered essentials, and they will be considered essentials in the future, but not necessarily their rights was considered essential. So the UNI launched a campaign that we call essential works, essential rights. So, and why that means that we consider that should be, as the video said, that the works should have received at least a living wage. They should have a proper collective bargain in place. They should be under social security to be protected if they get infected or if there is some retrenchment or job losses, that they can get access to the insurance, that they can be protected inside of the society. We also think that there was a huge discussion on safe conditions with our workers. And we understand that the pandemic was a special situation that they need to be considered special as well. So, and why we did that? because we saw that during the pandemic, and Vera just confirmed that the situation was the other way around. We have a more underpaid situations. We had a plenty of job losses. For example, in the commerce sector, in one of our countries here in Chile, is that 80% of the works in the commerce sector, around 450,000 works lost their jobs during the first 3 months of the pandemic. We have a kind of a situation when they intensify the transformations in the workplace, including intensifying the use of technology, establishing the work from home, increasing the hours, increasing monitoring. So that all those aspects was a situation that put in risk the works and also their jobs and their lives. So I want to share to you some of what we listen from our colleagues around the world. So a cleaner person in Peru who now is member of the Peruvian parliament, who used to clean up the streets of Peru, she told that she heard in the street that she was heroes, but company didn't treat her like this. The works that works in grocery was facing a lot of violence when they were attending the people and they asked for use of masks or certificate of vaccinations. And most of our works in the care sectors and another sectors that they were facing a lot of discussions around the use of PPI. Most of them have to pay for that. And that's also something that we concern in terms of our work. And what UNI is doing to address this situation. So we have a lot of sectors that we represent works that are considered essentials. In postal logistics, that despite the fact that they were very important during the pandemic because they were the ones that went to your house to deliver the packages and the goods and all the products that you demand from internet's web page. So they were suffering from this situation as well. But we made a campaign to show the reality. So how to support them, how they were important during the pandemic, and how was important also to create jobs during the pandemic to have this in place. And that's why demanded dignity for them. Also in the commerce sector, as I said, that they are facing violence, they were not able to get PPI from their companies. And we put in place a campaign that we demand that works from commerce deserve a hazard pay during the COVID-19. In the finance, ICTS, and professional management, we saw a huge increase of work from home. So, and we start to discuss the definition of the working hours. We start to discuss the importance of these connections. We signed some agreement with the multinationals to define what would be the right of disconnections of our work. Means that they are not in front of a computer. They should leave their cell phone off in the time of rest. And we did a lot of training around this. In the care sector, and I think that Vera spoke a little bit about the nurses. So that's a huge issue for us because in terms of long-term care and home residence, we have a lot of impact in terms of in our union. So some of our countries, for example, in US, we have more than 600 people that lost their lives. And that represents almost 40% of the total of the care works in the countries. And other sectors in Spain, for example, that 63% of the deaths in the sector was the people who were dealing with long-term care and residents and staff care. So because of that, we put in place a charter that demands security and safety workplace for works in the care sector. Then we go through the situation when we discuss with all the global unions about the needs of the vaccination for all. What that means? We are not we are not saying that it's mandatory to all to get a vaccination, but we are saying that all the works and all the people in the world have to have access to the vaccine. They should have a right to have access to the vaccine. And we consider some points to do that. First point is that we understand there is some region, especially in the African regions and Asian region, that some countries has not reached even 40% of the vaccination yet. So they didn't get enough vaccine to the whole populations. We also understand that vaccination was a fact to speed the recovery of economy. So the countries that have a faster vaccination, they were able to put in place to open the economy and to recover fast, including to create new jobs. And what is the demands that UNI is putting in place in terms of, UNI and the other global unions are putting in place in terms of vaccine for all? First, that we think that there is a need to have a more equal distributions in the vaccinations. We also believe that it's necessary to waive the intellectual property during the pandemic. We welcome the donations of rich countries to the poor countries, but we think that's not enough. We demand to remove barriers to access the vaccines. We demanded acceleration of the COVAX process, especially in the development countries. We demand to get quality and integrity in this process. And we demand that the richest countries do not stock vaccine. There is a fair distribution of the vaccines around the world. And before to leave and to not avoid the questions of mandatory vaccines, that the union has a strong position that we believe that the unions need to campaign in favor of the vaccines, but that's not a contradiction as the employers are saying, when you defend a worker that decide to not take the vaccines. And why I'm saying that's not a contradiction? Because I don't think that the employers are using that as a fair excuse to promote a job loss. They are just promoting new job losses with a new excuse. They are just saying that they are using the fact that the people are decide to not get the vaccine to fire them. But in the end of the day, we haven't seen, and Vera mentioned that, a replacement in place that we keep the numbers of jobs in our sectors. We see that they are using also the vaccination as an excuse to promote retrenchments in our sectors. Saying that we know it's polemic, we know that most of our union has different positions around this, but we understand that companies, employers, and business shouldn't take any positions in terms of vaccinations without to have a proper industrial relations and CBA and collective bargain with the union. We understand that the better way to do that is to sit in the table, to have a discussion with the unions, and to get an agreement. I am sure that our unions is mature enough to have a conversation with their members and to take the best position that will defend the right of their members. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcio, for giving us that overview. And I think you have asked us, or you're encouraging us to broaden our worldview and not look at our narrow circumstances of I am being forced to take the vaccine, but the need for equity and the fact that there may be a larger agenda, willing or not, that there's retrenchment behind not taking vaccine, and is that really and truly something that is right? And so as unions, it's not simply for us to say we oppose mandatory vaccination, but we should look at it in the broader context of the whole global workforce framework and how that impacts us and our livelihoods. So I do hope our attendees will come back to those particular issues as we go forward. Thank you very much. We move now. Now we've heard both Marcio and Vera to a point, talk about the issue of equity, vaccine equity, etc. I would want us to hear what Ms. Sandra Massiah is going to present and to take on board the fact that we need to consider that issue of intellectual property surrounding the availability of COVID-19 vaccines. Why is that important for us as trade unionists? How is that something that would interface in our whole discourse and our whole reality of vaccination in the workplace? Sandra?
Thanks a lot, Antonia. And certainly I would want to say ditto to the various points that have already been made by Vera and Marcio, and particularly understanding the importance of international labor standards. No life is safe unless all lives are safe. I think we need to bear that in mind. Secondly, as trade unionists, we are certainly firm in treating all that we deal with from a rights-based perspective. We're not going to be giving up one right in order to fulfill another right. And therefore, the role that we see seemingly being placed or being exercised by a number of companies and by a number of employers, and I say companies both large and small, where they seem to think that profit is more important than people's lives. And I think we have to emphasize that. That is particularly key. And that brings me into your particular point about what we call the TRIPS waiver proposal that Marcio also referred to. It's trade-related intellectual property rights under the World Trade Organization, the WTO. And rather than get into all the fancy words and phrases and everything, basically it is that right given under the WTO for people like Pfizer, and I'm going to pick on Pfizer if I may, to charge whatever the heck they like for whatever pharmaceutical. I don't even want to only talk about COVID vaccines. Whatever pharmaceutical we have to use, and they can charge whatever they like because they've got a patent for X number of years, and therefore they not only can charge what they like, but they don't have to share the science behind producing that. They're claiming that they alone, the countries in which, or the country from which Pfizer originates, they alone have the ability and capacity to produce, and therefore they don't see the need to relax those rights so that other countries, and in some cases there are the larger developing countries that we do know produce a number of vaccines and pharmaceuticals that we all use, that we all become dependent on, because that's basically what it is. So the global union federations under the banner of the global unions have put forward a platform, a campaign, because we're campaigning organizations as far as the global unions are concerned. We're campaigning organizations. And our campaign is that we want the public in particular to understand and appreciate that, yeah, okay, in Trinidad, you have all the vaccines so far. You have access to, well, I don't even know if you have access. Let's say the vaccines are there. But even in that context, who says that a Trinidad and Tobago or a Curacao or a Jamaica or a Barbados or any of the countries in the Caribbean would not be able to adopt an industrial policy that pulls them out of this current, I don't know, mess that we're in all over, by then looking at some new areas of development? And we're not only talking about the waiver for vaccines, we're talking about, widely speaking, any drug that is associated in any way with COVID-19, as well as all the diagnostics and everything related to it. So it isn't just the vaccine that we're talking about when we talk about the TRIPS waiver proposal. We're talking about all the treatments, the diagnostics, the various tools that are used in trying to eliminate or alleviate the various effects from COVID. Now, quickly to say that what has happened in CARICOM, and let me zero in on CARICOM. CARICOM is supporting the TRIPS waiver proposal. Another thing that at least one country of CARICOM has done is actually to co-sponsor the waiver proposal, and that is Haiti. But none of the other countries or CARICOM as a bloc has co-sponsored that proposal that is before the WTO. And one of our key campaigns, certainly as PSI, because we believe that safe workers save lives, one of our key campaign, particularly over the course of this year, is to have CARICOM as a bloc co-sponsor that proposal. We already have an example in Trinidad and Tobago where the government of Trinidad and Tobago has in fact, I think it's part of the group that has proposed this pandemic treaty. So it isn't that we aren't part of it in terms of the Caribbean, but I think what may be happening is that there's some within various countries that are thinking, well, we don't have any problem of so-called access, and therefore the TRIPS waiver is not something that we're going to push. If we aren't all in it together, then various countries are going to be picked off. Haiti saw a particular need because of their own situation, but that does not mean that part of the solidarity that we all speak of and this, we're all in it together. If that is true, it means that really and truly all countries of CARICOM and CARICOM as a grouping should also be looking at co-sponsoring that waiver proposal. But I also want to go back a bit, Antonia and colleagues, to when this whole thing started. We were all, I think, in a state of panic, and that's the trade unions themselves. We also have to do a lot of introspection in this. And I think one of the first regional webinars would have been from the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. And one of the presentations I made was we should not let a good crisis go to waste. And I think we have to ask ourselves the question, have we followed that? Vera spoke about the importance of the international labor standards, the importance of let me qualify social dialogue. Genuine social dialogue. It's not just inviting people to a meeting and you reading a speech and you say, okay, we had social dialogue. Have we really looked at that? And I think that those issues are at the background of all of this. If we're talking about the impact of these mandatory rules and everything, remember, governments have the right to set laws. Understanding that, and also within the context of having to deal with public opinion and the social media barrage of all sorts of strange tales, what does that mean for us in responding to these mandates? How do we deal with it effectively? And I think perhaps that is what people want to know, what to do. I think that's really what St. Vincent and the Grenadines wants to know, and so on. I think we have to pay a lot more attention to communications from the union perspective, because certainly governments in the various countries have done their communications, and I'm not suggesting that they've been perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But one thing that they've been able to do is communicate whatever message to the publics. And the message was that, well, if we don't mandate this thing, people will do whatever they like. And obviously they've used the tools available to them. As a government, they set public policy. But certainly as the people who put them there, we also have a really good role in communicating as well with the public and putting the issues squarely on the table about what it means. Because if we talk about respecting human rights, because these are human rights questions, We talk about respecting human rights. Are the human rights of the employer more important than the human rights of the worker who is actually creating the conditions for the employer to make profit? How does that sound? The other thing that I wanted, the third, I think, relatively big point in all of this is prioritizing our public institutions, and particularly our public health and care institutions. All of our governments with the WHO, they went to the World Health Assembly, the executive board meeting, and they agreed way back in 2016 that they would invest in healthcare, that would invest in human resources for health. But we still have a situation where we don't have enough nurses, we don't have enough pharmacists in some countries, we don't have enough doctors in some countries. So all of our system, our health system, is severely threatened because of something like COVID. But let's not forget, this thing was happening when we have dengue, when we have Zika, chikungunya, all the other things. COVID has just shone the spotlight on all of these things. And therefore, we have this opportunity now. It hasn't gone yet. We may have to double or triple up in some instances to really make sure that people understand that we've got the message. But have we been really, using our trade union principles to deal with what started out as a public health issue, a public health emergency? And I think that the impact, therefore, on workers, wherever they work, whether it's a workplace with four walls or whether they're outside in the field or wherever, demands that we pay more attention as unions to dealing with and working towards the ratification of some key ILO conventions, and where we've ratified them, to make sure that they're implemented, to use effectively the supervisory mechanism, a wonderful supervisory mechanism in the ILO that I think many of us have not really been paying as much attention to. We tend to follow it, as they say, in the breach, rather than seek to follow it and map it over time. Sisters and brothers, I want to leave you with perhaps three key messages. Safe workers save lives. We must prioritize strong health and care institutions. I want to put the importance on care, because care is a human right, and we can't separate health and care work. And we need to pay more attention and to beef up our skills, certainly as activists, and certainly to my own sisters, brothers, and colleagues within the public services trade union fold, to looking at our work in terms of communications and campaigning on public health issues that will redound to the benefit, if we work together, in terms of public policy on key public health issues. Let me finish with one thing. Let's get our workers to join unions. There are a lot more people out there that need to join a union. And if we have more people joining a union, then we have greater voices to do the communications and the campaign of which I'm speaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Sandra, for that. And as somebody is agreeing with you in the chat, workers must stand together and be united, and we have to lead one, each one take one, each one bring one, and lend support. It's interesting, though, that you put the context for us, again, that broader worldview of the economics of the vaccine and intellectual property, the big pharma arguments we've been hearing about. We're not going into experimental vaccine and the impact on the body. We're not about that. But then we have to wonder, and as unions, we have to look at whether those government policies to support those pharmaceutical companies, etc., whether those are major drivers behind coercion for vaccine in the workplace, and if so, what kind of work must we as unions do, as unionists do, to treat with that? And you were suggesting mobilization prioritization of our efforts in various sectors. And I would want to say, you said health and care, but I would want to extend care to education, because our educators will be involved, and I know Dr. Anderson will take that up in a minute. And therefore, we need to not only be talking in the public domain, but strategizing as well. And I hope we can get that from our participants today as well. Thank you very much, Sandra. We move to another sector, colleagues. We are doing well with time. You are reminded to post your comments and your questions in the Q&A so that we can be directed to participants, to the panelists. Participants, please be very precise and let us stay focused on the matter at hand. Dr. Anderson is going to bring the educator's perspective now and how this whole vaccine issue. And I noticed Dr. Anderson in Marcio's presentation, he spoke about the issue of disconnect. He spoke about the issue of defining work hours and how that has impacted us as educators. So I do hope you will be able to touch on that, Dr. Anderson.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and all the colleagues who have presented, ditto to those points raised, and your colleagues who are commenting online. Let me start out by saying that it's no secret that COVID-19 would have transformed how we do business and how we socialize. And certainly the education sector has not escaped the devastating impact of COVID-19, especially those of us who are operating in the region. Our education system was already suffering from all kinds of comorbidities, and so COVID-19 has only served to highlight those challenges that we have in the education system. We have been limping along, and I think we ought to congratulate our teachers and teacher leaders who have kept the system limping along several challenges, working from home, using their own funds to get data, supporting their students. In some countries are on bikes and all other modes of transportation to get work and collect work from students, especially those who are operating in the rural parts of our various states. So it has been difficult, but the teachers have been doing a marvelous job despite the challenges that they confront. It has been very concerning and disappointing to the teaching cohort in the region to see governments or employers, many of them have taken steps, in our view, to victimize our educators. And the Caribbean Union of Teachers made it clear, not only to individual governments, but we have written to CARICOM to outline our own position that whilst we recognize and understand the import of taking the vaccine as a means of saving lives and putting this pandemic under control, we equally recognize that teachers have a right to determine what goes into their bodies and not governments. And we sent letters off to CARICOM. We have written to particular governments, for example, in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, for the kind of victimization, in our view, taking place with teachers and certainly other public sector and civil servants. We feel that it's certainly a human rights situation that we are dealing with, and teachers must have, like all workers, the right to determine if they want to take vaccines, not democratically elected government. And sometimes we talk about what is happening in sections of Europe now with Russia and so on. It seems to me some of our governments are operating as dictators to say this is what is going to happen. And when we look into the democratic tradition that we engender in the region, it's people power. Government really ought to take instruction from us, not government determining that you must do, especially almost, invading your privacy, invading your person, saying that you must take this vaccine. Certainly, it may be vaccine now, but what next? That our leaders will come up with to say this must happen. And if it doesn't happen, then we are going to victimize you, we're going to discriminate against you. Hundreds of teachers in some of our islands are out of jobs despite having medical reasons why they can't take the vaccine. I know in one instance, the government has its own doctors who will review what a doctor has said and make the determination that yes, you must take the vaccine. So we have serious challenges. We understand the import of the vaccines, but we are against, totally against, any mandatory taking of the vaccine. The other issue we have to contend with is the efficacy of these vaccines. And that's a genuine concern among the teaching profession. Initially, we heard that if you take the vaccine, you wouldn't get the virus, then it shifted from that. If you take it, it reduces the impact and so on. So people have genuine questions. Government should really be paying attention to educating the population about the efficacy of these vaccines and encouraging people to take it, but not forcing them to take it, because we feel we still have a right. We are supportive of our colleagues in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and we are looking forward to see what will come out of that situation. The availability of testing processes and mechanisms across the region is something. There are teachers who are prepared to take tests periodically, whatever period that is, but that is at a cost in many instances today. We already know, and I'm sure union leaders will agree, but I speak specifically to teachers, we are poorly paid. So when you put added pressure that we have to undertake the testing cost, that is prohibitive for many of our teachers. The conundrum we find ourselves in as well is that you're asking teachers to get vaccinated, but there are quite a number of students in our schools who are not vaccinated. So if you're talking about health and safety, it has to be health and safety across the board for students and teachers, which we embrace and encourage. But so a testing regime should be in place so people have option to determine what they can do. Our government, and we have been pushing this, must recognize that across the world where we have mandatory vaccination, it really has not worked in many instances. What it has served to do is to divide society and to divide even families and workplaces against those who are vaccinated and the anti-vax, and all kinds of discussion going on. That is not healthy workplace kind of environment that we want. And so we are pushing back against that and pushing back against any kind of approach that will be taken by any government in the region to violate the human rights of teachers, to say you must take it. One of the things in a much broader context that must be considered, as I've said before, is the implication and other aspects of our lives. If governments are allowed now to do that, where are we heading? And it's a serious question that we all have to ask ourselves. Where are we heading? What next? Where in our lives they will come and decide that this is how it's going to go? That is something that we cannot engender, in my mind, as a region. So the hesitancy clearly will increase, has been increasing, especially in our region. Primarily, if you ask me, is a pushback. People are indeed resisting and not complying. And one would have to ask ourselves, is mandating the best way to get compliance, or it's about educating and encouraging, possibly incentivizing persons to take the vaccine, and some serious discussion that we need to have around that. So in closing, the Caribbean Union of Teachers oppose that. We think it is tantamount to rape, as one Jamaican trade unionist put it, forcing somebody to take something into his or her body without his or her consent. So it's tantamount to rape. And we really believe that it ought to be a choice, and we, as union leaders, and certainly the Caribbean Union of Teachers, our position that we encourage, and we talk about the importance of, but it is ultimately the choice of the teacher to make that determination, not a democratically elected government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Garth, for sharing the perspective of educators and how strongly we feel about the situation. And if we were to connect the dots, comrades, we would see that working across our panelists' perspectives and presentations, there are some common themes, and they're coming out as well in terms of what we are seeing from our attendees in the Q&A. First of all, it's that issue of mobilization and education. And I think as we progress in this dialogue, and even when we leave this particular activity, we as unionists, leadership, and as laymen in the labor movement, we will need to find ways to reach out to our brothers and sisters who are not in unions, who are not in public sector organizations, but who operate in small enterprises, as was said, and therefore who need our support and need the guidance and building that momentum. Therefore, that is one of the ways that we can combat the coercion, which is illegal. That is the way we can learn to move forward, living with the virus in our society and adopting various policies that will protect us at enterprise, at local, at personal levels. The other theme that comes through from all of our participants is the need for us to look at the international labor standards as unions, as workers, and therefore to build our campaigns around those, not just the catchphrase of no mandatory vaccination, but since we are talking about the implication for workers in the workplace, what would we need? Would we need a code of conduct, as one of our colleagues from Suriname is asking? Would we need now to have a policy similar to the HIV and AIDS policy that we have in the workplace? I hope one of our panelists can respond to that, so that at the end of the day, what we recognize is that, as somebody is saying, this mandatory approach, this coercion, it's not helping our job market. It's not helping our labor force. It's not helping our economic recovery locally, regionally, and I dare say internationally, as Vera highlighted. So how do we as unionists proceed? How do we guide our members? So I want to thank the panelists for their initial contributions and allow the opportunity now for our participants to share. I'm going to share questions and panelists can respond, and they too can share their thoughts on some of the matters that were ventilated by our peers. So we do have a question coming out of Suriname, as I mentioned, about the policy, similar to the HIV/AIDS policy. Do we really and truly go towards that? Is that necessary at this time? How do we get to that point based on our different sectors and the unique circumstances of the different sectors? So I don't know who would want to speak to that. Vera, perhaps you would want to treat with that in the first instance, and then maybe Sandra.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Antonia, and thank you for the question. About the code of conduct, it is important to understand how codes of conduct are created, how lengthy the process is. It takes at least, because again, of the tripartite nature of the ILO organization, The creation of a code of conduct would require at least one or even more tripartite meetings of experts, as well as a lot of background research and work, and it will take up to 5 years. So at this point, I believe that most of the issues in the area of occupational safety and health are addressed in the existing standards, in particular the mentioned conventions 155 and 187, as well as there are sector-specific conventions, like the one also that I mentioned, for example, Nursing Personnel Convention. During the pandemic, indeed, ILO was gathering information from countries of how countries were dealing with occupational health and safety, and it is all available at our website. And one tool specifically that I shared in the question and answer box is the tool created by the Caribbean office, and it is the 10-step tool for assessing and for dealing with COVID-19 at the workplace. And indeed, what we are promoting is as Sandra correctly said, the genuine social dialogue at all the levels on the subject, including in the absence of the national policy, the level of the enterprise, the level of consultations between the employer and workers in the form of collective bargaining or in other forms. So I think that this is my initial comment as for this question. I don't know if there was something that I heard about the termination of employment, and that I also wanted to say a few words. I think that Marcio mentioned about using the vaccination as well as our COVID situation in general, or as the pretext of employment. And yes, I wanted to share that indeed, this is another topic that is covered by the international labor standards, and there is a termination of employment convention number 158 that says that as a basic principle, the employment of a worker shall not be terminated in the absence of a valid reason for such termination. And this reason is to be connected with the capacity or conduct of the worker or based on the operational requirements of the undertaking. Temporary absence from work due to illness or family responsibilities do not constitute valid reasons for termination. Indeed, for this to be enforced, convention needs to be ratified, and it is not ratified by Trinidad and Tobago, but indeed all these provisions can be used as guidelines, whether in developing national policies or again when you are bargaining with your employer at the workplace. So these are the two remarks that I wanted to share. Thanks.
Thank you, Vera. Before you, as you on the floor, and before I go to the other panelists for the additional comments, perhaps persons may have missed it, as you mentioned earlier, in terms of the cost for testing. Dr. Anderson spoke about consistent testing, and the question is being asked, should that cost on a consistent basis be borne by either the employer or the employee? I know you referenced again particular standards and conventions. Could you just remind us of that, please?
Yes, in line with the standards on occupational safety and health, this should be at no cost to the employee as a general rule. But again, the conventions were created, they do not specifically speak about testing, but as a general rule, no protective measures should be at a cost for the employee.
Okay, thank you very much. And our ratification or non-ratification of the various conventions that you cited, the question is being asked, how do we as unions in this current context push to have those implemented, ratified? Where do we go in this particular fight as we try to deal with COVID-19, the realities as it's endemic, and what do we do?
Is it also a question for me?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get both of them.
That's both Sandra and Marcio are in a better position to share the union experience. However, I think that it was already said, and I would agree that this is through mobilization. This is through getting more workers organized. This is through having our the stronger voice of the unions, as well as bringing all these topics, including the topics related to health, to the bargaining agenda at various levels. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. I would invite other panelists to share their additional comments and perspectives based on what we've heard thus far. The floor is open.
Sure, I'd like to come in there, please, Antonia.
Yes.
In regard to Sister Claudette's queries and concerns, hello, Claudette, good to have you with us. Vera has certainly given the mechanisms, the technicalities involved with a code of conduct. In my own mind, though, I was thinking, is the code of conduct to deal with mandating or to prevent the discrimination if in fact someone is suggesting or hinting or saying someone has COVID and so on? But I'm not so sure that we need to, well, that we have to wait on the ILO to do a code of conduct. Again, it revolves around our understanding of the principles, rights, and freedoms of people, the rights of workers. And even if our country has not ratified a particular convention, and in this case, I'm thinking of 155 in the case of Suriname, it has not ratified it, but it's an international standard. And I think that this is where, and if I may get into what I tend to call the nitty-gritty of, because I think a lot of people want to know how to get things done. They don't just want us to spiel out these wonderful phrases and things. They want to know what to do. And right. One of my suggestions is, in the case of Suriname, start looking at what is happening in terms of the requirements from the ILO under the supervisory mechanisms to the governments. Now, the official notification goes to the government, but the information is also there for you on the ILO website. And certainly I can share with you, or Vera can share with you, and your national center or centers have a wonderful opportunity to tell it like it is. The government really is obligated to send its report to the national center, prior to submitting it to the ILO. And even more than that, trade unions have a right as well. It's part of the mechanism where they can give opinions, draw upon examples of how these things are not being implemented or not being put in force. So a big question for both Suriname and in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, have you been able to identify how these various mandates, or in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the new law, violate international labor standards that are in place? And I think that that's a basis. Appeal then to your national centers, and then through the national center directly to the ILO, or in the case where it's an individual union, of course you can, if you're an affiliate of PSI or UNI or ITF, lodge that complaint. Of course, you've got to got all your ducks in order and all of that, so that you can actually be doing something. We can talk as much as we like, but if you're not putting all the information in place and giving us the, pardon the use of the word, ammunition to go and tackle things, then we're just talking amongst ourselves. And an important thing that I'm not so sure that our unions do on a regular basis, each and every union in the Caribbean or in Latin America or in Europe has an international connection. Use those connections, because I don't think that many governments recognize that a union in a particular country has so many other million workers behind it. And therefore that's the solidarity. That's why you affiliate to an international trade union organization. So together we have to work towards getting these things done. And while we do want to win, I think for most people, they want to see us doing something more important than anything else. At the outset, they want to see us doing something that benefits people and not only or specific sector. We may use our specific sector as an example, but we must also in our language make sure that we're talking about all workers, in fact, all of society. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you very much, Sandra. Marcio and Garth, your thoughts as well. And we would also want to consider something else that our attendees have looked at. The fact that the courts in many jurisdictions have brushed off or put aside or avoided making judgments and pronouncements on the issue of vaccination in the workplace. And therefore, they seem to be taking a hands-off approach, and workers are left like a football, so to speak, to fend for themselves. So your thoughts as well on these matters, Marcio and Garth?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. Well, I'm a lawyer, but I'm not working as a lawyer, so I don't want to go into the discussions about the courts. And the experience that we have as a trade union is normally the courts do not decide in favor of the works. I think that sometimes it's better that they do not take actions and leave that to the discussions around the industrial relations. That's much better for us. But I want to echo what Sandra said, that it's time for act. We need to have actions. And actions mean that works right now feel that they are under attack. What that means, they have the pandemic, they have the job losses, they have the crisis, and they need for protections, and they are looking for unions. We never heard more that works were looking for unions than we heard during the pandemic. CBA became a very important instrument for us, and a part of the CBA, we also see that it's time for organizing. We need to reach out to those works. We need to talk to them. We need to invite them to be part of the union. We need to have a broader discussion around all those issues that we have discussed in here. Mandatory vaccination is only one of those issues. We have a plenty of opportunity. I think that COVID-19 was terrible. There were a terrible impact in the society, but also open a window of opportunity for us to continue to organize the works. I think that's an opportunity that we need to take as a union. We need to take as a global union, need to take as a local union, and continue to work around this. And again, thank you very much for inviting me to attend this meeting.
Thank you very much. And you know, Marcio, you were saying something again, mobilization. Link it with what Sandra said a while ago. We should not let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that's an important takeaway for all of us today. Garth, your comments, because there are people who are looking at the fact that our children are coming to school, as you mentioned, unvaccinated. They are making the teachers ill. There are situations in our schools. And what is happening there? How do we mobilize our educators to get them to lend support when they are hesitant, when they are fearful? Garth?
Thank you. Well, I think the history of the labor movement, certainly in the region, is strengthened in mobilization. We were big on mobilizing our ancestors on the plantation, and that's how even the very same political parties that and leaders that we are contending with now, many of them came out of, and parties came out of the labor movements themselves. So I think we have to go back to mobilizing and not be afraid to engage in political discussions too. Very often, labor leaders are afraid to get into political discourse because they think it may have some negative implications for members and how governments will look at you. But I think we can't forget our history and the connection between political movements and the labor movement. So we have to get into Main Street if we want to really impact the system and to build trust into the labor movement. I think for whatever reason, there are some people who no longer have any faith, if you may, or trust in the labor movement. We have to start delivering so that those we are leading can see clearly where we are taking them to. In terms of the legal discussions, we would have seen several legal opinions. And that is why we really want to see what's happening in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Very noted lawyers across the region have used very cautious words in making pronouncement whether or not mandatory vaccination is in fact constitutional or unconstitutional. You hear words like maybe or it likely not to be, but you're not getting any definitive position from these learned persons, certainly from what we have read. I've seen from the Bar Association in Jamaica, I've seen from something coming out of Barbados, Antigua. We are not getting anything definitive. And sometimes the court tends to stay away from these kind of very far-reaching, groundbreaking kind of situation that they find themselves in, because then they could get entangled into political interference and so on. So they tend to stay away. So unions will have to fill that void and have to get in and start the mobilization, start the education, and to open the eyes of not just those who are members, but the society at large to understand what is happening here. And if we allow certain things to happen, how that could open the doors for further violations of other rights that we have as citizens. So we have to fill that void, and we have to get back to work together, regardless of our different groupings and names, Caribbean Union of Teachers and Civil Service and so on. I think we have to pull together. I recall there was in fact an organization in the region where all the union leaders and the union would come together to discuss common concerns. I think we have to get back there to kind of take on some of these new challenges, if you may, new circumstances that we find ourselves in. So the isolationist approach will no longer work. We have to come together as union leaders.
Thank you very much, Garth. And I think that's a powerful message for all of us. And that should resonate not only with us as union leaders, but those of us who operate in our local spaces on the ground, in our industries, in our enterprises, because we too, we are the ones who make the union. We are the ones who will empower the leaders, give them the motivation and the direction to do the advocacy and the representation on our behalf, especially in terms of these critical matters. So I really hope that we take away from this, and there needs to be some further dialogue internally as well as externally. 2 points, and any one of the panelists can respond in terms of the questions or concerns. When we have a situation where in the private sector, there is no RMU, but there is a mandatory vaccination policy, and there's threat of termination without severance, what kind of redress would the employee have in that kind of situation? So I don't know if Vera or Marcio, if you would want to tackle that particular question, and then I can put the other one, which is a little more intense. Yes?
Which questions exactly? I'm sorry, I lost that.
It's in the Q&A, and basically it asks if there is no RMU in a workplace in the private sector company, but there is a mandatory vaccination program, and the worker fails to comply, and then there is termination without severance. What redress does the employee have in such a situation?
We have been faced that actually, that many of our works, and we represent a lot of works from private sector, and we have been faced the situation. What we are doing, if you go to our webpage, you're going to see that there is some guidelines that we put together with our unions to address the situation, some charters, some discussions, and we are addressing right now the multinationals at the global level to discuss also the situation, but especially we are trying to use that as an opportunity to organize work. During the pandemic, we had the opportunity to create plenty of new unions in the private sector that were in totally green field, that we had nothing there. And we are also working with our colleagues in Bahamas, with Teresa Mortimon, and with our colleagues from Jamaica to organize works using the situation that the works are facing right now. So as I said, it's opportunity. So we should see the glass in the middle, and it needs to be fulfilled. And I think that's the opportunity for us to fulfill the glass with a new organizing process in place in the region. I don't see that as a challenge. I see that as opportunity for us.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that is a fact that we have to take on board today. There are so many opportunities that have been revealed out of this discussion that some of us maybe didn't think about before, and therefore we must take note. Just to attendees again, Vera put in the chat a while ago the links to the relevant ILO documents that she mentioned in her presentation, so you can extract those from there. We also have in the chat, participants, the list of unions that you can join or you can contact within Trinidad and Tobago. And I dare say what we would try to do after the webinar in due course is to contact our affiliates in our other countries and get such information from them. I saw Sandra smiling when Garth was talking about going back to that point where we had common discussions on labor around the region. Maybe this is an opportunity, Sandra, for us to revive such discussions. What do you think, very quickly?
Very, very quickly, yes. And I think I saw Brother Anisette among the list of participants. And just being my usual wicked self, I would like to throw that out. We have to tackle this thing together. If we're in it together, we have to be together. And I think we really do need to do a lot of introspection and not let these opportunities go to waste. If I may also quickly, well, I don't know how quickly, but say, in our interactions within PSI across the world, we're getting all the news that it seems that in a number of regions, we're seeing that there's an uptake in unionization. The US, Canada, some parts of Europe, but I'm not sure I can say that in the Caribbean. Do we have any of our territories or countries or islands that are reporting increased unionization, or is it the other way around? And have we done any studies to identify this, especially during this immediate COVID period, because we're going to be living with COVID for a long time. So there's no post-COVID, people. It's the COVID era. So what are we saying about that? Because there've been lots of questions and comments within the chat about going out to the private sector, and why is it that we aren't seeming to attract people? What does that really mean, and how is that happening? Not necessarily looking for an immediate response, but I think it's something for us to really, really think very seriously about. Public sector unions in particular have had a lot of recruitment going on in the US and Canada and so on. What's happening in the Caribbean, and whatever it is, what's our analysis of it?
Understood. That bit of introspection is important. And before Marcio goes, I would invite him to give his closing comments to us. And then we will invite Vera to come on. I will put Mr. Anisette and Mr. Abdullah on spot and invite them to speak in a little bit. Marcio?
Thank you very much. First, I would like to apologize that I have to leave because we have another agenda. I am in Peru today. We have another agenda, including a protest in front of the Canadian Embassy in support of our colleagues from Trinidad and Tobago that are facing some struggle in Scotiabank. But, travel, just to let you know that we're going to have around 50 people in front of the Canadian Embassy here today to support your colleagues from Trinidad and Tobago. And as I said, that UNI see the situation as a sensitive moment for us in the world. We understand that the situation is worse than it was before the pandemic. but we also see opportunities to work together with our members in the Caribbean. As I said, we have some process in place right now in the Caribbean, and we are happy to discuss with any union that want to organize in our sectors, in the private sectors, in the private service sectors. We are happy to engage with Trevor, who represents us very well in the Caribbean, to discuss and see how can we continue to develop and cooperate with you in the region. Thank you very much for your invitation. It was a pleasure for me, and it was a pleasure for UNI to be part of the discussions. I know that's very sensitive. I know that there is a lot of questions that we have no answer yet, but we together can find the best way to defend the works. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcio, for taking the time to be with us today, and blessings to you and to UNI. And we look forward to future engagements. Be safe. And one of the things that we learned earlier, Clark, and it's in keeping with ILO standards and guidelines, is that you don't keep these webinars for too long, because then we tend to forget what was discussed. So we would want to wrap up just outside of 12:10, and therefore I would invite Vera to weigh in and share her comments, invite Comrade Abdullah and Comrade Anissa to share, and come to the question that Mr. Jeremiah has in a Q&A. Vera?
Would be my, let's say, closing remarks, correct? Or
is there something you wanted specifically to respond to based on what we were discussing previously with the standards and the mobilization, etc.?
Yeah, I think that I said what I wanted to say, and again, I saw again a question popping up in the chat about the costs, and again, in line with the international labor standards and in particular Convention 155, any required OSH measures shall not involve any expenditure for the workers.
Okay.
This is one point, and another point, yeah, again, what I shared in the chat was, among other things, the link to the ILO supervisory mechanism, and in particular, the reports of the Committee of Experts on the application of conventions and recommendations that Sandra mentioned earlier. And this, even when your country hasn't ratified something, you can still go there and check what are the issues other countries are facing. And if you see that there is a similar trend in your country, you can use it when you talk to your government or to your employer, saying that, look, this is what country X did, and it didn't work. They are now with the ILO supervisory mechanism, and these are the recommendations, because the ILO supervisory mechanism, they do give recommendations on how to improve the situation, how to make things work. So it is a way of, even without, even before, let's say, having the same issues or similar issues, is to redress to the knowledge already gathered and the experience of other countries, and using it in your country. So maybe this is one of the points that I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a question in the Q&A, which we will not forget, but I would want to invite our trade union comrades, Comrade David Abdullah and Comrade Michael Anisette, 2 minutes, gentlemen, 2 minutes each, to share your perspectives to this distinguished group of participants and panelists on the matter at hand, and to offer suggestions on how we as trade unionists can deal with the situation. Comrade David Abdullah, Comrade Michael Anisette.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Hello?
We have Comrade Abdullah, David Abdullah on first. So Comrade Anisette, you will follow, please.
Thank you very much.
Hello? You hear me?
Comrade Michael Anisette, we will come to you. We have Comrade David Abdullah on. So if you could just hold a minute, we will have you on in a bit. Thank you. But we are hearing you, yes. Comrade David?
Yes, good morning to everyone. And thank you very much, Mr. Antonio, and to colleagues on this webinar. Of course, I'm a retired trade unionist. I retired 6 years ago. But I like to keep in touch with what is happening in the labor movement, not only here in Trinidad and Tobago, but globally. And I do share information that I get with colleagues here from time to time. So let me just express my solidarity on behalf of myself and my political party, Movement for Social Justice, which is the only organization for whom I speak, express solidarity with the labor movement at this very crucial moment in history. The pandemic, and so many people have said this, the pandemic has exposed so much of the underbelly of our societies and the nature of our societies, and expose the nature of how neoliberal capitalism has been exploiting workers and creating more and more inequality in the society. And workers are extremely vulnerable at this point in time, as employers are using the moment to strengthen the process of reorganizing the workplace to the advantage of capital and to the disadvantage of workers. So this is an opportunity not only to fight back on the issue of mandatory vaccination. We are opposed to mandatory vaccination. We are for vaccination, but we are opposed to mandatory vaccination as MSJ. But this is an opportunity to really mobilize workers and the society generally around the issue of what kind of society do we want to have? What kind of society is being created now, and what kind of society do we want to have? Because we are facing that moment, to use C.L.R. James's famous phrase, socialism or barbarism. Thank you for allowing me to speak, Antonio.
Thank you very much, Comrade David. Comrade Michael?
Yeah, pleasant morning to all.
Good morning.
All the panelists, yeah, and the other trade union colleagues who will be listening. Allow me to express on behalf of the National Trade Union Center our appreciation for this kind of webinar and seminar that we believe is absolutely necessary. We believe in Natuk that knowledge is the key, and knowledge will win over everything. We believe that what has been discussed is inherently germane to the industrial relation landscape, given what we are witnessing within the trade union movement, what I will want to call a behavior that is rooted in a disrespect for the trade union movement and workers' rights. And while we in the National Trade Union Center, we support the question of voluntary consent vaccination, and I want to make that point. I don't want to get into the discussions in terms of the efficacy of the vaccination.
And that would be appreciated, Comrade Michael.
Right, okay. But we have a fundamental view on that. But the question is, after this seminar, after all this information, what do we do as a trade union movement, or as I will say, the labor movement? Because the point has been made that we need to forget about JTUM, NATOC, Siemens Union, PSA. No, we need to unite as a labor body, meaning that the labor movement. And we are uniting, I must say, under the banner of Unite to Fight. And I think that is the only alternative, a trade union perspective, a trade union view. And as I always say, we in the trade union movement must form our own narrative. We must not allow the government, the private sector, anybody to form the agenda for us and then we react. This is an opportunity for us to react. We have demonstrated within this pandemic the importance of the labor movement and workers by extension. Because with all what would have happened, we would have seen who were the frontline workers. It wasn't the government, it wasn't the minister, it wasn't the CEO, it wasn't the business elite. It was we, the workers, who were in the front line. And we have to understand the critical nature of the labor movement and by extension, the workers. And if we understand that and the power that we have, I believe that we could face this crisis, which has evolved into a social and economic crisis also, and come out bringing the kind of satisfaction that workers are looking for from the trade union movement. So once again, thanks. We have an opportunity Let us embrace this opportunity and let us move as a labor movement, as a trade union movement in the best interest of the people of Trinidad and Tobago and the wider Caribbean. Thank you, comrades. And again, thanks for this opportunity and for the foresight in having such a germane webinar and seminar on such an important topic. Blessings.
Thank you very much, Comrade Michael Anisette. Thank you. And I think from what we are hearing from all of our comrades, Sandra has given us that new campaign. Do not let a good crisis go to waste. That's our new campaign for us as trade unions over the next few months. There are two more questions in the chat, and then I will invite panelists to give their closing remarks. One we may have responded to already in terms of the private sector employee being threatened with termination and without severance for not being vaccinated. And we spoke to what kind of redress they would have and how they could reach out to different unions to get assistance and support. The other question, and I may have to ask Senior Counsel Warwick to chime in here as well, but panelists feel free, has to do with a perspective from one of our attendees, where he's suggesting that since the Prime Minister of the UK has changed or adjusted the stance on mandatory vaccination, is it possible, is it feasible for Trinidad and Tobago in particular to use the Privy Council as the last court of appeal to hold the government's mandatory vaccination policy? And I dare say that may very well apply to some of our Caribbean counterparts as well. Do we have the leeway? Is it feasible for us to approach the Privy Council as units to hold that mandatory vaccination policy? That's when I will open the floor to see who will weigh in and offer some suggestions on that. Panelists, come on, Ozzy as well. Who's taking that? Are we leaving that with we're not touching that with a 10-foot pole? Sandra?
Yeah, Comrade Moderator.
Yes, come on, Ozzy.
Well, I was going to respond to that as part of my closing remarks, because we are prepared to do all that is necessary to protect the rights of workers by any means necessary legally, which includes going all the way to the Privy Council and beyond.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Would any other panelists want to speak to that? Offer perspectives before we move towards wrapping up?
Yes, I'd like to, Antonia. And I'm trying to make sure I have my words in place. I take the point, yes, that you do the necessary legally, yes. I do want to put a semicolon and say that we have to be, I think, rather careful as trade unions about what seems to be an increasing tendency by employers and authorities to drive us to the law courts. It's a law court, not an industrial relations court. And there's a difference between the law and industrial relations. And I think along with, yes, a number of unions have employed lawyers and so on, but there are different branches of law. Have we actually talked about, do we want to develop within our current group of activists the ability to really deal with employment law? And also in terms of human rights law and how we marry those things, while at the same time also strengthening our people's voice. So I tend to be, yeah, the courts, but then what that does in terms of the employer, the employer can find countless amount of cash to do that. And for some of our unions, in fact, I would say a majority of our unions, that in itself is a barrier, is an obstacle? And what is our strength? And I think we have to be constantly working on that. I'm somewhat concerned when even, I have to choose the right, not basic or simple, but what we would see as first level issues. I note that a number of unions are actually taking those to the law courts and not necessarily employing grievance handling procedures and the whole matter of consultation and social dialogue that is genuine, follows certain rules. So I think we have to be ready to work to develop or further develop the ability to do those things, while at the same time, as a collective, being able to look at possibilities of taking it to the highest court in the land or in the territory. I think those are the kind of, little things that I think we do have to bear in mind. I'm kind of concerned that employers are tying up unions with all sorts of court cases and injunctions, putting on some serious fines, and then the unions, because they don't have money to do whatever, are then seemingly cowed into or feeling a certain amount of despondency because they may not have won. I mean, when we win, we make a lot of noise, but then when we don't win, it also has a very dampening effect, not only on the union as an organization, but on workers and people as general. Just some things to think about there.
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I think that is a reinforcement of the points that Garth made earlier, where we as unions have to perhaps see ourselves in a political context, not necessarily partisan politics, but a context where we step out of our traditional box and explore the other situations in a way where we can better represent our members. And that, yes, it does require building capacity. It may require additional funding. Maybe the ILO can set aside something to assist us with that. But at the end of the day, we too, as unions and as unionists, must reconceptualize our approach to dealing with this crisis, because this will not be the only one. And therefore, building resilience into our operations as unions to deal with vaccine mandates or whatever other crisis is something we have to work for and work towards in the future. I would want to, at this time, invite our panelists to share their closing remarks as we wrap up, after which we will have a closure by Comrade Ozzy Warwick. So we would start with you, Vera.
Okay, thank you. Thanks again for having me, and it was a very rich discussion. Just maybe four, let's say, final comments. I agree that this is a moment of not only challenges, but also of opportunities for trade unions. And again, you may wish to read, there was a very interesting study, Trade Unions in the Balance, by the ILO ACTRA. And that basically draws four possible scenarios for the trade union movement, depending on what actions will be taken in the near future. That includes quite gloomy scenarios of being replaced by NGOs, and unless action is taken. So I would like to call trade unions to take this as an opportunity to grow membership and to become stronger. Second, let's use existing tools. Let's use social dialogue. Third, let's ratify more ILO conventions and rely on them and implement them. And again, as was already said earlier, let's use ILO supervisory mechanism in a smart way, because this is another tool that can be used by the unions to support their positions, as well as to receive support and international support from the International Labour Organization. In closing, I would say that ILO and the ILO office in the Caribbean stands ready to work with the trade union centers in Trinidad and Tobago, as well as in the region, and support the work that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vera. for your participation and your support to us, and we look forward to continued support from the ILO Caribbean office. Sandra?
Certainly. Thank you, Antonia. So to echo Vera's point with regard to the international labor standards and the use of the supervisory mechanism, and also to add to that, we're certainly looking forward to partnering with the ILO Caribbean office, and Vera and I have had some initial discussions on this in terms of helping our various organizations better understand and learn better how to use the supervisory mechanism. Second point, the TRIPS waiver proposal. We're asking you to push your governments. I think we have representatives from a number of countries here to co-sponsor the proposal, and we'll certainly be in contact with you in terms of that campaign through our various affiliates and our allies within the trade union movement. Thirdly, proactively engage with governments, in fact, with social partners on issues surrounding COVID-19 recovery mechanisms. There is an ILO resolution passed in June of last year that I think we need to act on. It was a pretty tough negotiation process, and I think we have to make the use of it. And again, you have, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, present in the country and office, and certainly through the technology to contact the ILO office to first of all, put out that you need some help, some assistance in how to get this thing working. And through that, I think you have a wonderful way of dealing with a number of the issues that have been raised. The next one is the campaign. See your work not only as surrounding your members, but also your potential membership and society within your respective countries as a whole. And the final point, campaign to get more people, more workers. Well, I say people because there are various ways in which we can deal with membership. A member of a union doesn't always necessarily have to be a current worker. Think about that. And let's get more members in our unions. Let's increase the number of allies that we have. Let's work together, because if we're really in it together, we have to work together. Thank you very much. This was a distinct pleasure.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for sharing your wealth of experience and your perspectives, and for encouraging us to do the necessary networking and build the relationships to lend support. Garth, your closing remarks?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members. For me, I think takeaway for me is that it's a wake-up call for the union movement in the region. It's a wake-up call. We may be finding ourselves in a very reactive situation now, but we can reposition ourselves and become very proactive. Quite frankly, the pandemic is not over and the struggles will continue, and other attending situations will also come up. So we can get ourselves in a very proactive mode. We have to safeguard, certainly continue to work hard to safeguard the rights of all workers, and certainly for our teachers, that is uppermost in our minds, those of us who are in leadership position, and to maintain the democratic traditions of our various society. And one way of ensuring that is to ensure that power remains with the people. And union has a great role to play in that educating, in that mobilizing. And I like the point about mobilizing and get people to join the union. But one way certainly of doing that is that we who lead must so deliver that others will come. So that's very, very important. So we understand, certainly as leaders in the teacher trade union movement, the import of the reopening of school, the impact of education on labor readiness and preparedness and so on. But equally, we understand that that reopening, as we seek to get our youngsters ready and prepare them for the 21st century, cannot be done in an environment of fear and victimization and any form of illegal coercion. So we want, and to get that out to our leaders, that yes, we are ready to work, but we have to set the playing field level, and the kind of victimization and discrimination, we have to erase that as much as possible, and to ensure that we safeguard the health and safety not of students and teachers. And it should not be a case where our teachers are working under threats. So we are working against that. And as I said, together we are stronger. Together we are stronger. And I hope coming out of this engagement, there'll be some move to pull the union movement together within the region, because we may be in different silos, but our causes are, if you check them out, just the same thing: defending the work and rights and work and condition of workers and the rights of the workers as it relates to other employment situation. So it was a pleasure engaging, and we look forward to future engagement as we seek to empower ourselves and to further empower those we lead.
Thank you very much, Garth. And on my own behalf as moderator, I want to thank all panelists representing their organizations, ILO, UNI Global Union, Public Services International, and Caribbean Union of Teachers, and to thank the Leadership Council of JTUM for agreeing to host this webinar, which I am seeing people commenting has been very informative and beneficial. But I would want us at the end of the day to take the various points that have been made and let us act on them. The webinar is of no value, comrades, if we do not sit down now, do the introspection and self-analysis, and chart a strategic plan for how we will move forward in this new work environment. So thank you very much for participating. I invite the General Secretary of JTUM, Comrade Ozzy Warwick, to give closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Comrade Moderator. I have to say on behalf of the panelists and every attendee and those listening and watching on social media, to say to the moderator, congratulations on a job well done. I think you did an amazing job.
You.
I think everyone would agree that you were absolutely fantastic, in the spirit of the great Elmer Francois and Daisy Craig, Thelma Williams, Claudia Jones. Well done, Comrade Antonio Tika de Freitas, President of the Trinidad and Tobago Unified Teachers Association. I really want to express gratitude to all the panelists who've made very insightful comments and have triggered quite a bit of discussion. I think a lot of people leaving this webinar would be going back to their various workplaces and holding a lot of discussions, even with amongst their family members, those who can meet their friends in the streets, they will be doing so. They will be talking about this webinar for a long time. As I close, I want to say that one of the things that the COVID-19 has done is showed a fundamental weakness in our governance structures as post-colonial states. Because when you consider the vaccine mandates, what in fact it is a continuation of how the colonial authorities used to govern our countries, by decree, by imposition, and not by a respect for the people, not by dialogue, real social dialogue, real consultation, having views come from the ground itself. And therefore, in a situation where you have a pandemic that exposes a weakness in our governance structure, how do we respond? Well, the trade union movement in the Caribbean, and I'm so happy to have Comrade Sandra, it's always good to hear you, Sandra, always. Always forcing trade unionists to do a lot of introspection, no doubt about it. Comrade from Barbados, and of course, I'm first time hearing him, but I think he came with a lot of power and a sense of consciousness. Comrade Garth Anderson from Jamaica. Our legacy, our tradition was to challenge governance structures that imposes its will on us, the people. That's who we are. We fought slavery, we fought indentureship, we fought colonialism, we even fought neo-colonialism in the 60s and 70s. That's who we are. CLR James said, power lies in the streets. There is no substitute for it. And yes, we will plan, and yes, we will organize, and yes, we will be strategic. But we will buttress that with power. This is about power, sisters, brothers, comrades all. It is about power. Who has it and how they are exerting it on the rest of us. And therefore, our response is the response we know that have worked in the past and will continue to work. Mobilize, mobilize, mobilize. It is about people power. Those of you all who are listening, if you're not in a union, join now. Join now. Those of us who are in unions, who are on the shop floor, who are workers, who are members, now is the time for you to band together and mobilize your fellow workers, your family members, your friends. The heart and spirit of the Caribbean is at stake as governments are using this pandemic to reorganize our society to further entrench greater inequalities. We have to stop it. And we can only do so with people power. And people power can only be realized when we have more and more people joining trade unions, standing in solidarity with each other, not attacking each other, not seeing each other as enemies, but seeing each other as comrades in arms. Unite to fight. That is my closing remarks. Unite to fight. Whether you're a worker in Barbados, Jamaica, Suriname, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Grenada, unite to fight. Or for fathers, for mothers, or for parents, they did it. And they were victorious, and they brought us independence. We must now go further to ensure and guarantee our rights and our freedom. Thank you, comrades.
Thank you very much, Comrade Ozzy. And as we unite to fight, whether as unionists or as citizens who are looking for social justice and joining with unionists to achieve social justice and equality, we are all urged, don't let the crisis go to waste, unite to fight. Comrades, thank you so very much for joining and participating, and we do look forward to future engagements. God's blessings to you all. Our webinar is ended. Do have a blessed day. Thank you.